Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha, my name is Nikolai Feldman, and you are watching live Voluntary with Alexey Arestovich. Alexey, hello. Good evening. 3 years. It's been 3 years since the beginning of Russian invasion into Ukraine. A lot of these days we reviewed here in our war diaries. What important words perhaps you have to say today? You won't believe it, but I would say that we need to look forward. We need to keep our eyes on the future that was fought for us by our soldiers, by volunteers, by all citizens of Ukraine, at home and abroad, friends who were contributing to that, who first did not allow Putin to break us 3 years ago, and second, allowed us to hold and capture the future for us. Now, in the world, the new vision of the future is forming, and however they are trying to present it and show that everything is grim, gloomy, and we're being given as a right capture for Russia, and we're being abandoned by friends, this is not so. Look at the facts. And when things that I wrote in my post about 1 trillion, you will see that we will have a fully righteous opportunity to say that this future was captured for us by our soldiers. When people are asking me, what did we fight for? Why do we now forfeit some things to Trump and to Putin? We've been fighting for the new world. We've been fighting for our future. If not for our soldiers, we would not be talking about the sovereign fund, an independent fund. We would not be talking about billions of investments into our economy, about new ways to coordinate peace. This all became possible because of the resistance and the fighting of our Ukrainian soldiers and citizens. I see a lot of citizens screaming up into the skies, was it for naught? No, it was not for naught. There is a simple rule. The victory in war can be measured in peace compared to before the war. Of course, if we measure territories, we have lost some. But if we measure in terms of how this peace would be procured, we have made a gigantic leap forward. It will be known very soon, so more details are about to come, but you will see. And listen to the criteria that you are measuring with. If you're measuring with the lost territories, of course, this is one side of the story. Nobody's going to forget them. Nobody's going to just forfeit them to Russia. But we need to soberly understand that in the nearest future, we would not be able to bring them back even in diplomatic fashion. I'm not even talking about military. But the capabilities that Ukraine is to acquire and is already acquiring as a result of this conflict, they are the breakthrough level. Ukraine got a chance that it did not have since its independence moment that started about 34 years ago. And this is our achievement. I'm not talking about defeat in this war. I'm saying that this is our achievement in this conflict. Nobody can say now that this was for naught. Even though this mood is prevailing in many social and media channels in Ukraine. What we're getting, what we are obtaining now is not about nothing. It's about new perspectives that are opening for us. And I don't know if we can congratulate ourselves in the year when the Shaheds UAVs are still flying, when people are still dying on the hot front, but we definitely can note that achievement. We can definitely toast to it. And huge thanks to all those who are helping Ukraine to get here, from within, from without, from friends, partners, everybody who contributed. All right, Alexey, so about your post, where you mentioned that 40% of participation in this peace solution is United States, 40 Russia, 20 China, and why do you think this is acceptable? I am not operating in the framework of acceptable, not acceptable. The second part of my post is talking about that we need to leave the understanding of acceptable and not acceptable. We need to shift our accent in the world on what President Trump is talking about, accentuation of the cause and effect. Look at how America is commenting American administration is commenting on this. A lot of people were upset about softened resolution in the United Nations that the United States voted for, that they're not using the terms of aggressor. But you need to understand what are they preparing. And to disrupt it, to disrupt all these perspectives that are working on right now by just accusing certain parties of guilt and using other colorful epithets in their regard, this would not be smart. And this is what some people in Ukrainian society, some organizations are using to conduct a psyop against the population and saying that we have been left alone. Trump is a traitor. He is giving us to Putin, and we need to circle around. And it would be one thing if they would be circling around Ukraine. They're suggesting to circle around a certain person in Ukraine in a very high position. So if we talk about the share of this piece, it is considered that $350 billion were spent on this war by United States. Trump says that this amount was spent in all kind of fashions by United States on this war. Russia already has about that amount, $300+ billion worth, frozen in different assets in the countries. And Russia is not expecting that these money will be given back to them. They understand also that Ukrainian people will not accept a single dollar or a single kopeck from Russia, a single ruble, but they understand that 350 billion rubles are in dollar equivalent, $350 billion in ruble equivalent are arrested, and they can be used in retribution and rebuilding Ukraine. And China, of course, is also participating in this. Now, these negotiations are happening behind the closed doors. We need to understand that Ukraine was invited and Ukraine refused. Second, China has a very high representation in these negotiations, the highest you can imagine. And third, if you want to call it New Yalta Agreement, that changes the principle of relations in the world and the principles of the future geoeconomy, where geoeconomy is substituting geopolitics to a large degree, where the problems of geopolitics are being compensated by geoeconomics. Trump's administration approach is rather simple, actually. Why fight if you can make money on it? Why drop bombs, shoot missiles, kill people? Yes, wars happen, but they need to end. And then, at this place, there has to be profit, not loss. People who are saying that Trump is going to abandon Ukraine do not understand one notable element. Trump cannot allow himself to lose Ukraine. His approach is straightforward. Everything that I touch needs to turn into gold. This is a relentless story of his success. Therefore, Ukraine, if Trump is taking upon it, cannot be lost. He cannot afford repetition of Afghanistan and getting the same result as Biden administration did. People who are saying that he gave up on Ukraine do not understand his psychological type and do not understand what he is using as his guiding light. So what Americans are doing, their offer sounds like this: we will bring $350 more billion to the table to add to what we already spent on this war overall. But in order for this to not be corrupted and to be visible, we need to create a fund that is not controlled by Ukraine and control of certain strategic branches that are of interest to investors will be controlled with an audit function by investors. And it needs to be an ongoing process so that those of Ukrainian bureaucrats with proclivities to appropriating things they should not would not have access to steal from those resources. And they do want to give us a way to access those resources that we cannot access otherwise. This is to address those who are saying, oh, we're wasting everything. No. Speaking of rare earth elements, rare earth minerals, we would not be able to mine them for decades, for maybe centuries. United States would bring technology, jobs, engineering schools that will stay here and will help us to mine those resources that would be unavailable for us otherwise. In addition, it provides for a certain control of an infrastructure built around it, because it needs to be reprocessed, maybe not initially, maybe secondary processing as well. So one needs to understand that Americans are going to invest additional $350 billion to whatever they already invested. Now, they cannot provide that as direct aid to Ukraine government. This is all presented because America already has a strong vaccine against such actions, and that's what Trump administration is fighting against with USAID and all. So what we need to understand is that they are not aiming to export our natural resources and national reaches and steal them from us. They're actually aiming to help us mine them, to help us get them out, because otherwise they would be inaccessible for us. And they aim to be able to rebuild Ukraine, to pay Ukraine for the bravery, for wits and resilience that we expressed when fighting against the aggressor. Now, I'm where I'm located, not for nothing. There are certain reasons while I'm here. I'll be giving you new information as it becomes available, and you'll get more details, but please trust me, the details are very promising of this agreement. Now, as to China, China is participating in the New World Order in a good sense, in that Yalta agreement. They're also not interested in new wars, and they also want to participate in establishing new rules for the world. One of the areas being discussed is not only Ukraine, it's also Arctic, where there'll be another trilateral fund. Initially, it'll be trilateral, but other countries and private companies can join it if they wish to do so. It's just the initial share of participation in the destiny of Ukraine and Arctica are about the same. And China comes in and says, okay, give us 20%. We, of course, are pretty far out. And it's worth of $200 billion that we can participate in investing and processing. And the principles that will be used in this case would be the principles of new international cooperation. And a separate group of experts participating in the process are saying that they will be using processes that were developed by international society when building international naval projects, international sea projects, when building the sarcophagus in Ukraine over the Chernobyl station. So international cooperation processes that have been established. And also these processes will be likely used in joint cooperation in space. I can see there is probably an influence of Elon Musk in this process here. So this is not a catastrophe. This is a difficult restructuring, but this world came sooner than it was expected. We need to understand. Just a second, my son is asking me to say hello. Alex, I do love you a ton. I love you most in this world. You're the best boy in this world. You're the best son in this world. And you, Alex, is the most important person for me. Because for me as a dad, you're the only son. Regardless of how much I love my daughters, you take a special place in my heart. That's why, big hello to you. I do love you a lot. And thank you for watching me. All right, let us continue with Uncle Nikolai here. Uncle Nikolai joins in sending a good message to your son. Okay, so I understand that this sounds like a fantastic story. We heard a lot about different things, about ending this war in 2 to 3 weeks. We heard about some Anaconda plan that Oleg Ponomarev was talking about, but unfortunately none of that transpired. And this is a truth that's going to become transparent very soon, what I'm talking about now. I'm just running a little bit ahead of it before it becomes fully disclosed publicly. Similar to what I was doing 3 years ago at the beginning of this war when I came to the Tribune and the presidential office, and I was leading the information given to our people. And I'm targeting the same thing, providing information, providing insight into what is happening, and addressing some of the questions that I'm being asked. Why am I running ahead of certain officials? I do want to make sure that our society looks at it in a certain fashion, from a certain angle. Specifically, when we're faced with an ocean of lies that are awash in Ukraine society right now, when people will be defending their dissertation on the PSYOPs, done by Ukrainian government against its own people at this moment, they'll probably be discovering a lot of things. I think this is horrible what they're doing, specifically that they're exacerbating the despair and fears. They're going and they're attacking the situation from an angle of keeping their own power, and they're affecting the future and the perception by people of their own future. What can I do here is just to come out and present facts that I know to be true. And you can come and ask me, are things that I warned you about half a year ago not happening now, if you're not sure if I'm correct. Indeed, Alexey, things do come true that you warned about a year and a half ago. There is an interesting position to add here from Mr. Brodsky, a well-known industrialist from Ukraine, that resonates with you. He represents about 2% of the globally produced titanium. He has a lot of contacts with the United States. A lot of contacts were happening before Trump election. He was participating in our streams on Alpha&Omega. He talked about different ways how governors are contacting him from the United States and competing with his options and offers to conduct business in the United States. So what is he writing specifically? He's saying, guys, please understand, nobody is stealing our natural resources that have been in our soil for millions of years. And they will continue lying there if not for investments and aid from our partners. Trump is not taking our infrastructure, our ports, or anything. The thing is that those treacherous Americans, as our media writes, they want to create a fund together with Ukraine and other countries that will be charged to rebuild the economy of Ukraine and will be afforded a portion of income from mining of the natural resources to help us rebuild our economy. People understand this is super important for us. We need to rebuild our country, we need to grow our children, we need to trade with the whole world, and we need to do it with the help of this fund. So this position is very resonating with what you were saying, Alexey, that it is very important. It is important for Ukrainian citizens, and Americans do see that as a good option, and they do want it to happen. And I think it's very important for us to bring it to our country to make sure that there are no anti-American moods here prevailing, because it seems to me that we dropped into the old Soviet-style anti-American moods, and people are already writing messages to Bankova Street to our president. Oh yeah, Nikolai, I'm feeling myself to a large degree reading what's happening in Ukraine, that I'm 9 years old, 40 years ago in the Soviet Union, and we were watching some evening news about evil capitalists attacking our independence. So what I want to say here is, first of all, we need to understand nobody is giving up on us. Nobody is treasonous to us. Nobody is stealing from us. Instead, they are defending us. They're going to invest in us. And we are about to become a platform where new ways of cooperation in the world will be redefined between existing military and economic powers. Speaking of safety guarantees, Americans did not want to bring it up in the open, but Rubio was taunted too much, and he eventually erupted, being upset at the behavior of Zelensky, who, according to some rumors, made American Minister of Finance wait for an hour and a half before receiving him and then yelled at him, again, according to third parties that were present. So what I'm saying is that this is going to be the best guarantee of security in this model. Do you think there'll be any power in the world, including Russian Federation, that will be bold enough to bomb a joint US-China project? It's hard to imagine such. Right. This is absolutely unreal. Do you think America and China will be able to defend their investments, their technology, their workplaces, their specialists, their profits from here, from these investments? Do you think they will be able to defend that? Right. And the size of this sovereign fund is not limited by $1 trillion, but there is no upper limit. $1 trillion is just an intermediate goal. And king's dynasties of Persian Gulf are already interested in it. Other countries, I think, will join. I think India is probably looking at this too with serious analysis. So this is to become a significant hub, global hub, where any aggression towards it in attempt to break it is almost an unrealistic scenario. And I suspect this kind of defense is way better defense than any defense that NATO can provide. Because in NATO, they're still discussing whether Fifth Article is to be executed if any other member is attacked. They're already discussing the creation of army of EU. Some people are concerned about American participation in NATO, but everybody understands that this form of investment is not going to be attacked by anyone. And this is your insurance from the next war. This is your insurance from the treacherous Putin who has presented in Ukraine that he'll go and try to take Lvov and the rest of the territory. If on the way to Lvov he'll have to destroy American facilities, I don't think this is going to be a reality. Even Putin understands that it's better to make money than to spend it fighting. Therefore, I think we pulled a golden ticket here. And everything that we've sacrificed was not in vain. However much you hear in the media that we've been sold, that everybody will be devouring our natural resources, this is the most cynical kind of lies that is sent out to process your brains with only one goal, to make sure that one person remains in power. However, a meeting here in Ukraine by Rada also said that, some things are not going to fall the way Zelensky likes. What Alexey Rada allowed him to understand. They probably pointed out that when the question is in relation to $600 million that he needs to build additional 2 reactors, and Yulia Tymoshenko is running and finding money for that. Well, right, Yulia Tymoshenko and Petr Poroshenko keep surprising me, Nikolai, with their positions in this story. But when the personal question of Zelensky's power became a big question that he managed to present as national security interest, they ran over to him and taking basically an anti-American, anti-Trump position, gathering votes and influence. This is very not serious. And it seems like there is only one real oppositioner in Ukraine who is not living in Ukraine and who is naming things the names they are, and who actually was naming them since a year and a half ago. Because I don't know who else, seriously. It seems like it's only me in this field. Anybody else from the public politics? Maybe Dubinsky from prison is also talking about that, who is also a presidential candidate, but he's in Ukraine in prison. But anybody else? If perhaps somebody else is talking about that, they just started talking about it recently. I have been discussing it with you here in these streams for a year and a half already. When I understood how it will go, I could not come back to Ukraine. I was forced to be outside of Ukraine. My family is torn apart because of that. Because a year and a half ago, I understood where is it going. I think you understood that mostly in the United States, right, Alexey? Right. I did go on a tour to the United States on trip. I spent about a month in the US. I had a ton of very interesting contacts, after which it became very clear to me. And I've been very honestly trying to present this idea, this view to our country. And Zelensky now is trying to not only fight with Ukraine, but also struggle with Trump and I guess with China and the king dynasties of Persian Gulf. And he's relying on the European left, who hate the European right, and of course, by extension, hate the new power in America. And what is surprising is the pardonless position of Brussels and other capitals of EU. They all started to call upon war. Even the Prime Minister of Denmark is coming out and saying that peace for Ukraine on these conditions is worse than war. Can you imagine that? And then all of them gather again and represent their support to Zelensky, unlike the damned Americans. And immediately we see the publication from Guardian and publishes certain stats that you can find even without Guardian, that European Union purchased from Russia by $3 billion more worth of energy, worth of fuel, than they provided aid to Ukraine. So I'm writing a post about that. You guys are toying with Russia more than you're toying with Ukraine, than you're supporting Ukraine. The war is raging for the 4th year. Rivers of blood were spilled, energies, the systems destroyed, industries destroyed in Ukraine. We need to stop it, and we need to stop it not as a loss, but as a very advantageous outcome for Ukraine, much better and much more advanced than one could even imagine. But those dual-faced creatures who are trading different benefits with Russia are imagining a different future. They're sending delegations from Europe to Putin in the open, in the hidden, and they're doing a lot of crazy things to try to make it more difficult for Trump. And I did ask a question today as well. Is it right that Ukrainians need to keep dying because EU bureaucrats cannot establish good relations with Putin or Trump? And in parliament in Ukraine, they were supposed to vote for a resolution that Zelensky will remain a legal president until a new presidential elections are held. European Commission sent observers to declare and report about stability and support to Zelensky by Ukrainian Congress. And he's needed, unfortunately, mostly by these forces to just make it more difficult for Trump. And suddenly, Ukrainian parliament fails in this vote, and it starts the reverse countdown for Zelensky. His own parliament, where his party's prevailing force showed him that, sorry, Mr. President, nobody can give you an eternal ticket to remain in power. And now I guess we're seeing the negative countdown. And all of these European observers are returning back without the expectations fulfilled that Zelensky is supported in his country. So our parliament is doing a lot of negative things too, but today, for the first time, it said a very active no. And given that the logic of exit of this situation is very simple, that Zelensky needs to resign voluntarily. He did mention it in his press conference, that he can resign for peace. New prime minister, a speaker of the parliament becomes a prime minister, and he is preparing the country for elections under ceasefire. And again, this is just a ceasefire of a hot phase of this war, so people stop dying on the front. And he's preparing the country for elections because there'll be a lot of different tasks to arrange how to make sure that every voter votes when a third of our people are outside the country. We need to verify the voters' lists. One needs to follow a pretty difficult process to enable our future elections. Now, you need to address the ceasefire, you need to address what's happening in the military, work with the fund, work with those people who are outside the country, how they come back. This all needs to be worked in the process before the elections and after. Zelensky is laying on top of it as the tombstone and is not allowing for any change to happen, except for maybe that fakery around army corps, and that's about it recently. One can bring a lot of different arguments against Zelensky, but remember one number, 55. You can actually use that number on different merch to protest against Zelensky. Maybe this number will become a symbol of protest. 55 is the number of percent that government defense order was not fulfilled in 2024. It means that all of your friends and relatives fighting on the front did not receive half of what was promised to them in military equipment, and this is a direct responsibility of Zelensky. And he didn't even comment on this. Well, this is a scandal of such a scale that even in a non-war times and peace times, in a normal country, that happens to a smaller degree, everybody would be ousted. Prime ministers, the head of generals, the head of military command, perhaps even a president. Under no circumstance, military procurement can be fulfilled by less than 50%. Even 3% less, 5% less is already a big scandal in peace times. And here we have war times, and we're only fulfilling 45% of this order. Poroshenko back in the day, remember, he had a scandal with Svenarchuk, and it was blown so much, but it actually is it's dwarfed by this number under Zelensky. One can be talking for hours about how borderline incompetent was Zelensky government, draining the achievements of our soldiers down the toilet, but you can also say 55 and try to argue against it. I cannot try to understand. Try to explain to me that half of the government order for military production is good. And there are no attempts to compensate for that, no attempts to punish anybody, no commentary on this. Alexey, I think you mentioned all that in a stream with Yulia Latinina. Indeed, I think we have different audiences, and that's why I'm about to present the same data here. That's why I'm talking about this 55%. Right, guys, if you want to see more emotional stream of Alexey about this number, you can watch Yulia Latinina's stream. And I want to say, I do not forgive three things: when the church is being attacked, when soldiers are being attacked, and when children and women are being attacked. So here, Zelensky needs to resign, and a voluntary change of power needs to happen. And America and Russia will have to deal with the government of a transitionary period and then with the normally elected one. And all these things will be signed by this new government. So what does our great Zelensky do? All the negotiations are happening behind the doors, behind the closed doors. America, China, and Russia. Zelensky refused voluntarily to participate. So to reveal the big mystery, I had to come here by myself, since our president refused to. And I think this is the most horrible thing. You refuse to participate in negotiations of this caliber. Ukraine is not presented. And he's running around with a slogan, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, yet you're the one who refused to participate in this meeting because you're too proud, because he was not given another opportunity to steal from this fund, and it's made truly independent. And the most important thing, that nobody kicked him out of this table. He was actually invited. He was anticipated to be present here. And the fact that one has to defend the interests of Ukraine in the informal fashion, when I do not have any official responsibility, and I'm here trying to present Ukraine, similar to what happens in the military. In war, when the company commander is killed, anybody who is nearby who can pick up his rifle and say, okay, listen to me, is becoming the leading officer. So that's what I'm doing. If nobody came from Ukraine, I raised my hand and came over to at least informally represent the country and do what I can. We need to understand one more important thing, that it's not only that lack of our participation is fueling the swamp of dark rumors about this agreement and creates a lot of conspiracy theories around it. But Zelensky office is also actively using this opportunity to scare Ukrainians, to leave them hopeless, to give them the feeling of being defeated and cheated upon, basically making a 180-degree of turn from real events. I think this is something that will kill this regime. That's why one of the senators in the United States, after Zelensky's speech, came out and said that after this speech, Zelensky just needs to resign. Not because he attacked Trump or American government there, but because he is lying to people. He's lying about everything. He's lying about the state of things in the country. He's lying about the state of things on the front. And he's fueling the feeling of defeat for the soldiers on the front. I'm talking to a lot of friends of mine, and they're saying our current feeling here is that we've been abandoned. And that feeling has not been birthed in them by Trump or Arestovich. That was imprinted upon them by our dear Ukrainian president and his office. That's why I think with my pure heart that Zelensky needs to leave the office with his team. Somebody like me who was with his team 3 years ago, who was standing on the office podium and presenting the view of the office to the world 3 years ago, is now here saying that he needs to resign. His office needs to resign. He is the main obstacle to the good future of Ukraine right now. And one thing, if he was just an obstacle, he's also a corruptionaire. He's stealing our money. He's stealing from the international aid. And he's using that situation to maintain his own personal power, deceiving the soldiers on the front and their families. And such boldness, such treachery, it's difficult to imagine. 3 years ago, I could not have imagined that he will fall that low, that he will change that much. And he'll be grasping at power till the last moment. I think the sentencing of history is already clear. It will commence in the nearest future, and the best thing he can do to preserve some dignity, some modicum of dignity and respect here, is to voluntarily resign. This is the only thing that can preserve, if not the remnants of respect, but at least some normal attitude to his role in the war. When more details will come out from official investigations conducted by the United States, it'll be too late. So, do you think this needs to happen after he meets with Trump this week? If Trump agrees to meet with him, right? Trump said that he's ready to meet him this week or accept him this week or next week. Right, they might meet, but I think he'll be put in front of the fact to make that decision. I think Trump will lean on Zelensky to do that. Because there is nothing to really negotiate about. And not because Trump did not want to talk to him, because Zelensky doesn't want to talk to him. And Zelensky refused to participate in anything. He took the position of a very offended prima ballerina and is now attacking everybody who is not in his camp. It's unacceptable. That's one thing. But direct psyop against your own people at such a pivotal moment, this is beyond reasonable things. To steal hope from people, to blatantly lie to them the way they do, and his office does. I want to switch to some expletives, but I'm barely holding here. Let me read to you, Alexey, a quote from Ukrainian journalist Yuri Nikolai about this story. He is commenting the publication of Bloomberg that most details are already agreed upon, and he refers to the words of Stefanishina. Yuri wrote that what we saw was a classic story when Ukrainians are being forced to a certain decision in several iterations. A while ago, they were forced to accept Zaluzhny's exile in the same fashion, and now they're being forced to accept Zelensky as a peacekeeper, as the main peacekeeper. Right, Nikolai, that's some peacekeeper who runs around Europe, who collects more votes to support the war till the last of Ukrainian, to just be an obstacle to Trump's plan. Right, that's some peacekeeper. Now, Alexey, technically, Zelensky did receive a huge support in the society. We see how a lot of Ukrainians posting different TikToks, how they sending bad messages to Trump, how they don't like him. So there is a lot of support to Zelensky still in society. And some people are saying that he's still holding to a significant presidential rating. He is in a position of a person who represents national interests of Ukraine, supposedly. And now signing different agreements about the fund or some world agreement, he looks in the eyes of Ukrainian people as the person who is being trusted en masse. And I understand, indeed, Nikolai, our people, I don't have any qualms with the people. They're being deceived and they don't really realize the position of Zelensky, the real events. It's difficult for many of them to believe some Arestovich talking about that from overseas. And they don't want to believe all the dramas around these funds where Zelensky is participating. I know the details that you will probably see in the media soon. And trust me, when I'm making these comments, I know what I'm writing about. And my conscience doesn't allow me to remain numb. It is my people. I have chosen them. Very simple, right? I did choose them when I was giving my oath. But that's lyrics. So when you have a feeling that your main ally betrayed you, this is exactly the feeling of 3 years ago of a castle under siege where we need to hold on to each other and do not surrender to a very evil enemy, perhaps fighting to the last person. So I understand these moods. And I wrote, if Zelensky was really fighting for the interests of Ukraine, for the interests of our people against Russia, China, United States, and everybody in the world, I would be the first one to write to support him. But he's standing for his own power. And scary China, United States, and even Russia somehow agreeing to the future world that will be much better for Ukraine after this war. And this is, considering all the losses that already happened, this is one of the best solutions that one can create. And such a blatant thievery of this victory from Ukrainian people by Zelensky's office is just treacherous. Let's also look at some other things here, Alexey. I think it's important. And I think it is related to that resolution of the United Nations that was voted today. Let's talk about the complex of a victim. I think your commentary here can play a good role. In your view, when do you think we should have stopped considering ourselves a victim in this war? When should have that stopped? After the first iteration, when we pushed them from under Kiev around March of 22, or maybe a bit later when we had operations in Kherson, and that's what Poroshenko is saying, that we needed to stop considering ourselves a victim and act from the position of power. You know, at the end of 22, nobody was going to talk to us. Nikolai, Mr. Poroshenko is slow to the party as often. I want to remind our listeners at what happened in autumn. In autumn, we started to fight for Kherson instead of Zelensky's plan to go attack the mouth of Crimea, where we would have essentially blocked the Russian group in Kherson by that maneuver or forced them out. For unknown reasons, we decided to go and attack Kherson, who had a very well-defended positions, and we were losing thousands of people, hundreds of armored vehicles. Yes, we liberated the right bank and we liberated Kherson, but we lost an opportunity to gain a much more valuable trump card if we would have captured the mouth of Crimea. This was a huge mistake with a capital M. And that's when Putin, despite all the pressure, Russia turns on its long will, their civilizational super weapon that they inherited from the Mongols. He officially declares the annexed territories to be part of Russia, including Crimea. That is being affirmed by a decision in their constitution, and they rewrite that. And then he announces mobilization, and he starts attacking Ukrainian energy systems. His allies asked him to not enter into the winter campaign. Europe asked him to not enter into the winter campaign. He decided not to. And he decided to overpower that with force. And now, honestly, tell me, was he successful? As honest adults, we're not children, right? There's no need to hide here. In my view, he got everything he wanted. He started 22 as the world pariah with the orders of International Criminal Court on his name. And then later he held 60 heads of states in the BRICS summit, roughly half of the current active group in the United Nations. Then his Minister of Foreign Affairs flies to UAE, where he's being greeted with a parade. And now he's negotiating with the United States and China. This is the long will in work. This is how it works. You can be acknowledged pariah, you can be completely depressed and pushed out to the corner, but eventually you do turn things around. There's an old Arabic saying that when the caravan of 100 camels turn around, the last camel becomes the first. But, dear friends, I also have a long will, and I do understand the game that they are playing and how it works. So they have won their round. They've won it several times. And today the reality is what it is. You can dislike it, you can be against it, you can even use a super civilizational tools that is used a lot by globalist Democrats, global shame. And that is very common to Ukrainian collective subconscious because of Taras Shevchenko's work. And that joining of eternal whining and presenting yourself as a victim, that also plays to the books of globalists, that also would portraying Hamas as a victim. And it's easy to be a victim. You always have an alibi. You're not responsible for anything When Americans are saying that this war should not have started and Putin was put in certain conditions, this is not to clear Putin off there, and as some people are trying to present it. They're just talking about cause and effect. They're just talking about how we got ourselves in this situation. This is not to excuse Putin. This is what Angela Merkel is writing. This is what the head of Zelensky's office, who was organizing the Paris meeting earlier, and then he said that Zelensky's government basically dumped all the agreements. I'm here to talk about that not as trying to attempt to clear Putin and his actions. No, I'm here to highlight the reason, the cause and effect. This war indeed should not have started. It could have been avoided by significant forfeiture from Ukraine, and Putin actually was looking for that. He was hopeful for that. He returned our seamen, he forgave 3 billion, and Zelensky got the sailors, got the money, and after that started to not follow his word and his promise. That's Zelensky's style and his administration style, continuous bullying and not following with agreements. Look at Kolomoisky, where he is now. They've dumped Putin, they've dumped all their partners in Europe, and the style of such dumping was invented by Danilov, the head of Ukrainian National Security Office, and he was bringing 3,000 people into sanctions monthly and then basically giving them an option to pay their way out of this. And if they refused, they would make it harder. Americans were very surprised. They were saying, why are you putting 3,000 of your own people into that list? And they were not guessing, they failed to guess that it was a way to expropriate Ukrainian businesses from its owners in such a fashion, using the war and using the special situation and force majeure. So that complex of victim is very much coinciding with our humanitarian space that was ruled by USAID programs. That Shevchenko's traditional vibe and genius that brought this mood to Ukrainian literature coincided with the bet of USAID to a global victim. Victim can do a lot of things and not be blamed, right? Like Hamas, who recently killed 2 brothers and their mother, and it's okay, right? Because they're victims of horrible Israeli aggression, right? And all that was affirming in our people very deadly pattern. The victim is, of course, right, but it's dead. Because victim has no responsibility. And if you have no responsibility, you do not live. You do not present your will. You don't move. You maybe move as a zombie. And one thing, if we fail to resist that complex on our own as a country, then USAID programs were enforcing that. And then Zelensky, on top of this, comes out and says, we are the victim in this conflict. We are the country victim. And he continues to run around declaring that we are a victim. So here is your victim trifecta: literature, culture, international programs, and Zelensky's government. 3 seals upon our society of that victimhood. What do you do with it? And this is the story of victimhood. All right, Alexey, I do want to push this story a little further. It seems like besides Poroshenko, that's right, one thing, ex-president, Mark Milli also announced back in 22, he said that it would be important to affirm certain achievement of Ukraine on the battlefront with diplomatic measures. And he was hated for that in Ukrainian media space. Ukraine was acting from the position of force, but decided not to sign that advantage on the front into anything, into any diplomatic, into any agreement. How do you mean advantages? Well, we did liberate Kharkiv and some of Kherson at that time. Nikolai, one needs to understand, Kharkiv is a very successful operation, but it is very local. And as of today, a lot of its results are being played backwards. Second, Kherson operation is our colossal mistake. I think we followed for a political boon of liberating the right bank of Don, and we did not decide to go for Crimean Mouth. We decided to do it later, but it was too late. Russians already built enough fortifications and troops. Back then, there were no limits. There were no troops. There were no barriers. We could have just marched and taken it. This was one of the key mistakes we've done in this war. Key horrible decision we did. And Putin understood pretty well that he was facing a very limited force of Ukraine, that we did lose a lot of forces that we have and could have used in Crimea or in the mouth of Crimea. We used them attacking on Kherson district. And Putin managed to withdraw his troops rather orderly. I'm curious, who was that great specialist back then? Because they were withdrawing rather successfully in the north from Kiev. There were a lot of our troops who were trying to go follow on the heels of Russian troops and kick their butts when they were leaving, and ran smack into the landmines, into certain methods they used to protect their retreat. They've done it very by the book. I would like to know the name of whoever organized that. And in Kherson, when they were leaving too, they made sure we do not have any mobile communications. They blinded our intel. They conducted certain anti-intel operations, and there was no internet, no cell coverage, no nothing. They arrested and executed those who were helping. And it was not running away. It was a very careful withdrawal. It is a very difficult maneuver, actually. They could not attack properly at that time. They didn't have the numbers, but they did very well organized retreat. And we did not gain any real advantage in 22. If we listened to Zaluzhny and we went to Crimea, that's when we could have had some advantage. But I think advantage is not situational advantage on the front. I think the main advantage we can have is pragmatism, is presence of long will and desire to achieve and willingness to achieve your long goals, regardless of the circumstance. And this is the signature style of Moscow Kingdom. With Chadalum, we recorded, a very well-known historian, we recorded a stream about Ukraine as a project. And we discuss how these two projects correlate, Ukraine and Russia. And he's quoting a British historian who is saying that Moscow Duchy was one of the weakest during the Mongol invasion. But back then, they bet on pragmatism and very cold-blooded calculation of resources, capabilities, and everything. And I want to say this is the signature style of all those who won in the global history. And that's what Ukraine fails to understand, because we are like the other pole to that. First of all, we are very concentrated on symbols. When we are ready to drain a lot of content because of a symbol. Kherson operation is exactly that story. Pragmatic approach would be to attack Crimea from Zaporozhye, but we decided to go for the right bank of Ukraine and the only regional district center that was occupied, that needed deliberation. And we acquired certain advantage locally that could have birthed the second Istanbul process, and we could have maybe finished the war. But no. Putin made all these motions to officially sign in newly acquired districts to constitution and new mobilization and continuous war effort when he realized how weak our strategy is. We still had the strong army, but the strategy was weak. In Russia, they went through several wars, through several economic crises, and they know their historical tradition is in that. They know that you can be at the very bottom of a situation, but if you have clear goals, long iron will, and ability to pragmatically evaluate the circumstance, including those horrible measures when Prigozhin prisoners were sent by hundreds and thousands to die on the front. This is anti-human, very cynical, but very pragmatic approach that they did. Back then we were laughing at them, but today we have some of our inmates fighting, or ex-cons. And we are repeating essentially everything that we've been laughing at Russia in 22. They're just pragmatists, so they calculated that a couple years earlier. And we instead like to run around with symbols. Symbolic capital is important, but we unfortunately always put it higher than the actual earnings. So Russia was much weaker than Ukraine at the battlefront initially. Their total numbers were about 350,000, together with Donetsk and Lugansk districts. We had almost 800,000 mobilized. But they, being in that phase for about a year and a half, and having spent a year and a half rebuilding their forces, suffering certain defeats. They actually, the first year was continuous defeat for them. They could not, and their plan to invade failed. They only succeeded somewhat in the south, but north and east was a complete disaster. We even destroyed the number of generals and commanding outposts in record numbers. But then they lose in Kharkiv district. They have to make difficult decisions in Kherson, those difficult decisions by General Surovikin. They grit their teeth. They understood that the destiny of their country and their regime is on the plate, and they made those famous 5 Putin's decisions to continue the long war. We failed to make even one of them. And now blaming West that they didn't give us enough, it doesn't make sense, because under Zelensky, we are horrible strategists. Our level of incompetence is total. The whole military political leadership is horrible. We could have been given another 1 million soldiers, 3 million planes, 800,000 tanks and everything. We would have drained everything down the toilet in the same fashion. We would have just paid less lives maybe. But if you do not have strategy, nothing will help you. And if you have egos fighting over your country, no aid will be used effectively. And I understand that Americans gave us and allies gave us much less than we asked for. But I also understand, and I'm very upset with the Biden's administration that was promising one thing and doing another thing, was also very pragmatically modeling this war and the flow of this war. But I don't think this is the main reason of our lackluster success before the big three decided to cease the hostilities and go for profit. I think that the failure of Zelensky administration, the government, the Congress and military leadership, this group of errors, this group of wrong decisions made by these entities overall led to our demise. Of course, if we got more support from allies, we got what we asked for, perhaps our platoons, our companies would lose less soldiers and we could have defeated more of the enemy on the battlefront. But we need to understand that Russian strategy is 3 heads above ours, unfortunately. And today, this is the proof. They, with China and the United States, are solving the destinies of the world, and we are so dumb in face of Zelensky that we didn't even come to that table, even though we were called upon. Remember, half a year ago, we talked that we were not invited to the discussion. This time we were invited, but we did not go. Who we are after that? Who was providing for this quality of strategy? And now he, of course, can bubble up, huff and puff, and present himself to be a victim, but there is only one answer. We had a very low quality of strategy under Zelensky. No will, no understanding, no pragmatism. Everything that our vis-a-vis United States and China have, and our opponents, Russians, have, and the quality of strategy, of Russian strategy, has prevailed over us. Their quality of troops is much worse than ours, much worse than they had in 22. Back then they had contractors, they had professionals. Now they're usually lumpen classes, the lowest classes of society. But their strategy is outplaying us. If we manage to start creating cores at the end of a 3rd year of war, and even that as a PR action, not as a real core action, it takes time. And nobody creates a core immediately. You start with a detachment, with a division. You need to start going on smaller up. And the cores need to be separate on certain detachments, certain directions. And everything we've done, again, was done like a PR project. Look, we have done them. You've been asking us, right? Why are you upset? And the level of strategy is just below the floor. You know, remember when I said that Zelensky failed and he's beyond the level of his competence? Right, in September of 23. Exactly, that's when I said that, and that continues to unfold since then. And Russia has won, has prevailed on what they usually bet upon. Americans got what they usually get, and China is also doing the same thing. Long will, pragmatic calculations, strong will that doesn't allow you to treat yourself as victim when you're being declared a dictator. The whole world is against you, and there is a court order from the International Criminal Court. You just continue being an excavator and hitting in the same spot. And then 2 years later, you discover that those who gave an order in your name now have orders in their names. End of the first hour.